Everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on making the investment industry more accessible for people with disabilities. We're just waiting for everybody who is in the waiting room to get into the webinar before we start formally. But maybe Tim, do we have a lot more people waiting, or do you think we are now getting to full complement?
We just need to wait a bit longer. We've got maybe a quarter of the people.
Right.
It's just going up and up and up at the moment. So let's just give it a minute.
Brilliant. We'll just give everybody another minute or two. Great. Should we kick off? Perfect. Brilliant. Well, we are so delighted to now have over 50 people join us today to talk about making the investment industry more accessible for people with disabilities. My name is Alexandra Haggard, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Diversity Project, and also now one of the co-leads of the Workstream focusing on people with disabilities, which we've actually just renamed the Ability Network. Our purpose today is twofold. One is to raise awareness, and the second is to drive inclusion. Firstly, we want to raise awareness of the issues and the challenges that are faced by people with disabilities and those caring for them. And I'd like to make sure that you all know that part of the panel is going to be an Ask Me Anything session, and no question is a bad question. The second thing we want to do is talk about how we can get better as an industry at including people with disabilities. And to do that, we have the fabulous Sally Piggott from Scope, who was meant to be providing us with this update in March last year, but the pandemic got in the way. But we are so delighted to have her here with us today. I'll also say a few words in a moment about another initiative that we have where we're going to work with members of the Diversity Project to achieve the accreditation Disability Confident, which helps firms message to potential employees that they are open and receptive and supportive of people with disabilities. So part of the reason that we collectively, those of us who are on the workstream about disabilities, are so excited is that we find that there's a great opportunity right now. What we've seen is that we collectively need to increase the focus on people with disabilities in financial services. And although there aren't particularly good numbers about how many people with disabilities work in financial services, we know that the number is pretty low. And also we know that many people who have disabilities don't necessarily want to disclose the fact that they have one to their employers. Now, what's interesting is that with the volume of conversations about inclusion and about diversity that are happening, it feels like there's a real opportunity for us to raise our voices about including more people with disabilities and to make sure that this isn't a part of the population that's being left behind. It may surprise you to know that over 70% of us will, at some point in our lifetimes, have a disability. And that's a huge figure. And what it means is that this isn't an HR question. This really is a strategy question, and it's a business question, because we need to make sure that we're including this talent and also that we understand this part of the population so that we can do our jobs to best effect. Now, we are only going to be able to make progress if we all collaborate. And today is another step in that collaborative journey. So what we'll do today is firstly, have a conversation amongst the panelists to understand better what it is to either have a disability or to care for somebody with a disability to drive awareness. And then we'll move to inclusion. And one, we'll talk about adapting best practices, which Scope has partnered with the disability Workstream on as part of the diversity project. But also, I want to let you all know that we are extending the number of groups that we work with, and we're going to be partnering with the Business Disability Forum to create a series of workshops that will help member firms work their way through becoming disability confident employers. And there will be an email follow-up after the session with more information if you wish to join. But first, what I'm going to do is briefly explain why I am so passionate about disability before inviting my fellow members of the disability workstream and the panelists who you're here to hear from to introduce themselves. And very briefly, the reason I have a personal story about disability, in addition to believing that disability is something important generally that we need to be thinking about. And it's because I discovered about 2 years ago that I have an illness, which is not a visible one, but that actually qualifies me as having a disability. And the reason that that really struck me is because I didn't realize that I could possibly be considered to have a disability, and was rather struck by it. And in fact, was sort of shocked that that label might apply to me. And I think that this idea of us labeling people as having disabilities is one that we have to be very careful about, because it can make people feel like they are less capable. And it also can make people who are interacting with them assume that they are less capable. And I can guarantee that, as you will see from many of the people that we're speaking to today, that that is far from the case, and in fact, very likely the opposite. And so with that, what I'd love to do is to introduce Ashley, Philip, and Tim to you, or actually invite them to introduce themselves to you before we go in first to some preset questions. And then what we'll do is we'll open up to questions from the audience. So Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Alex, and hello to everyone. It's really great to see so many people engaged on this important topic. My name is Ashley Fagan, and I work for Amundi Asset Management in London, and I've recently joined the Ability Workstream of the Diversity Project. And I'm on the panel today with a little bit of a, let's say, a different perspective as a carer for someone with a disability. So this has made me very aware of the challenges faced by individuals with disabilities and those caring for them. And I'm also very passionate about this topic as I think about the future for my son and how we can help together to make the industry more inclusive.
Brilliant. Philip, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, sure. My name is Philip Fielding, and I became a double amputee in 2016, following basically a bout of flu that then led to sepsis and culminated in a septic shock on Easter Sunday in 2016. So I was admitted into intensive care with multi-organ failure. And in a bid to keep me alive, the doctors had to effectively support my vital organs by cutting off the periphery medically, and the body was doing it anyway already. So that resulted in the periphery just not making it through the onslaught. And in August 2016, I had both of my legs below the knee amputated. At the time, I was a portfolio manager in the emerging market bond team at BMO GAM, so Bank of Montreal Global Asset Management. And what's interesting about this is that I know firsthand what it means to be a healthy, professional in the mid-30s to now become a severely disabled individual still in their mid-30s. So I'm very keen to share the learnings of this journey with my firm, very keen to raise awareness for what it means to be able-bodied and to become disabled, because I think I can offer a unique perspective with regards to this. And something that Alex said earlier in her introduction is actually really very, very true. And that is that disability is extremely multifaceted. So my life is is extremely impacted by the disability in some aspects, but in other aspects, it is virtually untouched from the condition. So it's very, very different, and this is very different for each individual. So that's also something I'm very keen to highlight. And maybe in the process of this, we can just change the perception among the people that are attending today, and if they go back to their institutions, they can maybe change the perception of institutions also. If we just got a small step towards that, then that would be a great achievement. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Philip, for sharing that with us. And I'm sure we'll come back to hear more about all of the ways in which your life has changed. But now, may I invite Tim? Would you like to introduce yourself now?
Well, hello, everyone. So my name is Tim Roberts. I work in the global marketing team for HSBC. I'm primarily focused on asset management. I've been in marketing for over 20 years, so giving away my age somewhat there. I am profoundly deaf in both ears, so I was born deaf because my mother had rubella when she was pregnant with me. So I've never been able to hear and rely primarily on lip reading. I've had a mixture of mainstream education and deaf education in my life, mostly mainstream. One of my biggest frustrations in life is people think that hearing aids, which I wear, make me hearing, and they don't. I am not like your great aunt or your nan who had become deaf as they got older. I was deaf from birth, and hearing aids just alert me to noise around me. I don't know what the noise is necessarily. One of the things that's really important for me is to raise awareness of deafness, because like Alex's disability, it can be seen as a hidden disability. And people have a perception in their mind, which is usually passed down a generation. One common phrase is deaf and dumb, and trying hard to eliminate that sort of phrase, if you like. And the more I educate people, it educates not just society, but my employer. HSBC has been fantastic towards me at providing equipment, captions, and that made life a lot easier for me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tim. Well, what we might do actually is let's go into the first question, where I was going to ask you to share with the audience your experience of what it means to live with a disability. And actually, Tim, should we come back to you first?
Okay, fine. So there's lots to think about. I mean, for me, I have to do so much more than other people. So, for example, we've got live captions on the screen, but I actually have them on an iPad next to me, which is provided by an external company. So when somebody sends me a meeting request, I have to then go onto a portal, log on. I have to give the company, which is called AI Media, all the information about the meeting. Then I have to wait for them to confirm that they can support me on that meeting before I can accept the meeting. That means that if somebody sends me a meeting on a short notice, which I guess if we were in the office, they would just come up to me and just talk to me, or they haven't got 5 minutes. That's not possible during COVID, and so it's much harder to respond to short notice meeting requests. But AI Media have been fantastic at helping me out with that. The other thing to think about is the service that I use isn't free. I have to pay for it. And for most disabled people, it's usually provided by the government in a thing called Access to Work. And what happens is you tell Access to Work how many meetings you might have in a month. They then give you a budget, and then you have to spend that budget. If you go over the budget, they're questioning you, want to know a lot more information as to why. So when people cancel meetings because they're busy or something, I still have to pay my captioners for the support, and then I have to pay them again for the rearranged meeting, and that's quite frustrating, especially having to set up a new meeting as well. And then something else, again, this is the awareness thing. So access to work is, they pay my employer, if you like, for the captioning, but my employer has to pay them first. So I have to fill in all up the paperwork, provide the invoices. My land manager then has to sign it off. It then has to go off to them in the post, and then eventually my employer will get paid. So that's something else, but it's much harder. The other thing is, for me, I have to be much more aware of what's happening around me. It's hard for me not to be paranoid when I'm in the office and people are talking across desks and I'm just working on my computer. And, generally it's banter, but sometimes, you feel that you're missing out. And I had a great manager several jobs ago at Direct Line who I told her about it, and she said, Tim, you really don't have to worry. They're just talking crap most of the time. They're just get on with work. But, it was nice to have that reassurance. And then thing is, when I'm trying to make a train journey, I look up on the board, train going to London Bridge, I get on the train, and then all of a sudden people start getting off and the train moves, and I think, oh, something happened, so I go and speak to somebody, and then someone goes, oh yeah, the train's not stopping, it's going straight to London Bridge, and I'm thinking, well, I need to get off at Crystal Palace, and then I have to go all the way to London Bridge because they don't put that information up on the screen. So, my life is a lot about adaptation, and I have to make a lot of adjustments. So I used to have a flashing doorbell system, and many years ago, the council would provide that for you, and it meant lots of wires around the house, big orange lights on every wall in every room, made the house look horrendous. Someone was in the bell, all the lights in the house was flashed, it was absolute nightmare. But now I've got a Ring doorbell. So it comes up on my phone, comes up on my watch, it's fantastic. I've got a vibrating alarm clock that wakes me up in the morning. It basically scares the hell out of me in the morning. It also scares the hell out of my partner, who knows it's like a foghorn because it gives us sound as well, and he loses a couple of minutes of his life every day because of this. So, things are just a few of the examples that I have. That, what it's like to be deaf.
Brilliant.
Back over to you now, Alex.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those. And some of them are things that you might expect, and then some of them are rather unexpected, actually. But it's nice to hear that there are some ways in which life is getting better through technology and things like that, and that you're able to take advantage of them. Philip, I wonder if you could tell us about your experience, which of course is very different, and also perhaps weave in a bit about the difference in your life that now actually living in the pandemic has made, both positive and negative.
Yes, in fact, this is something that I think is true for most disabilities, that disability just governs your life. And that's just a fact. I mean, you can't shy away from it, right? It determines how you go about your life. It determines the equipment you need. And in my case, it's obviously extremely different to Tim's case, right? I mean, I'm now the proud owner of 4 different wheelchairs because I need 4 wheelchairs. You wouldn't believe it, but it is true. I mean, I have one that I use in the house. I have one that I use outdoors because if it's wet outside and I come in the house with a mucky wheelchair, I can't get it clean enough. So I have 2. I have one for outside, one for inside. I have one that I use in the shower, and I have one to play tennis. So these are my 4 wheelchairs, and I joke with people and I say on a good day, I use all 4 because it means that I actually had a chance to play some sport. So, and this is another thing, right? I mean, it's you need to make it work for you individually, and this is maybe the difference between other elements of diversity when it comes to gender or race or neurodiversity or any neurodiversity. Maybe a bit similar to disability, but effectively the lived experiences of disabled people are so vastly different from one disabled person to the next. And that is something that I had no idea is the case before I well, in inverted commas, acquired this condition. And it is profound how it changes. And in terms of just in terms of some of the parameters that drive my life now, they've just changed. So I often get told by people, but you are not really disabled. When they see me walking around with a pair of chinos on in the city or whatever, they would not notice necessarily that I have a disability. Some people think, you know, I had an acquaintance that I ran into in a previous life, it feels like now under COVID, right? In London, Liverpool Street Station. And he said, "You look like you're limping a little. Have you had a skiing accident?" I haven't seen him for years. So he's like, "Have you had a skiing accident?" I said, "Well, a bit more than that." And that is a fairly common occurrence, right? People don't really realize. And then they say like, "Oh gosh, I didn't actually see this coming." And but you're not actually disabled. You don't look disabled. You're not disabled. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. I am profoundly disabled. Let's be very clear about this. I cannot walk a single step on my biological feet. So that makes me extremely disabled. And I cannot walk around on crutches even, right? So other amputees can, if you have a single leg amputation, you can use crutches. They might not even own a wheelchair, but I own 4. So it's those things that really seriously change it. But at the same time, other aspects of my life are virtually unchanged to the life before, right? I still do my job. Not exactly the same way, in a different way, but I would even argue in a better way than before. So it does not mean at all that because you've acquired a disability in your life that you become a worse employee. To the contrary, in fact, I would argue you become almost a better employee because you become a lot more resourceful. Your horizons broaden. You look at life in a different way. I mean, we invest in markets. It's effectively predicting the future, trying to make decisions as to, you know, as to how things could possibly develop over time. So if you've been through a life-changing experience, then this aspect of the job, in fact, I would argue, having acquired these new skills in terms of, you know, problem solving, in terms of how you deal with adversity, how you deal with uncertainty, how you deal with probabilities. I mean, this is my job, right? But it is also my life, right? I deal with probabilities in my life and I deal with probabilities in my job. And I would argue there's a huge amount of cross-fertilization between those two. So it's definitely not something that recruiters, employers, hiring managers, etc., should shy away from, because my experience as well by joining this population and joining this disabled community is they are all magnificent at problem solving.
Brilliant. Thank you, Philip. Well, and maybe we'll come to Ashley now, because I know that you too are magnificent at problem solving and logistics, but for slightly different reasons. But also that, you know, apart from some perhaps, I mean, it probably feels rather mundane on a day-to-day basis to be able to juggle everything that you need to while looking after somebody with a disability, what it feels like on a sort of more macro level as well.
Yeah, Alex, I think you know, you said it perfectly in terms of the element of having to juggle everything. I think that's probably the sort of the biggest, I guess, part apart from the emotional element of, you know, it was, I guess, similar to your experience, something that sort of I've recently discovered or has been, you know, defined as such as being a disability, and so coming to terms with that and what that means for the future and all that kind of elements are one side of it, but then the actual you know, the time commitment required to get on with life and the, you know, the extra support my son requires, as well as the numerous medical and specialist appointments. I mean, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, and then there's the medical side of it, which is another whole list of specialists. So the list goes on, and it's quite extensive. So that's been definitely the biggest adjustment. And I think the, you know, the realization that you do you know, need help and support in order to juggle it all as someone working full time in the industry that we are in, that has huge demands on my time as well. So from that perspective, that's been definitely the biggest adjustment, and something that I'm definitely the most, you know, thankful when I look at my current situation and my employer, and it, you know, it isn't even something that I've you know, disclosed in such a way, but they have been flexible enough that I've been able to juggle these elements. So that from that perspective, you know, I'm very, very thankful, and it's allowed me to continue my role basically uninterrupted. And I think it's a really, really important message, to anyone on this call, is that, if I look back when I actually found out about it, which, it feels like an eternity ago, to be honest, but actually it was only a little over a year ago. And if I think about, the implications that has had, and on my, as I said, on the time commitment required in terms of the medical appointments, etc. But also, if I look at my performance for 2020, I've managed to have one of the, the best sort of years in terms of business results and performance. So, it is possible that, I think that's the big message, is that if we give employees the flexibility they need to be able to juggle, these kinds of, things that can arise in one's life, and be able to be flexible with, different elements that both Tim and Philip have raised, they can really get the best out of their employees. So I think that's just sort of the key message that I would want to pass on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ashley. And let's, we've got questions coming in, which is brilliant. So please keep them coming, because we will come to them. We're gonna shift to the Q&A in about sort of 7 minutes or so. But we've got a couple more questions that I wanted to put to the panel first. And I wonder whether we could go around maybe in the same order, and just if you could give us a few highlights of what the impact of COVID has been on you and on your lived experience as somebody either with a disability or caring for someone with a disability. Of course, Ashley, you've pretty much only been doing this in COVID. But perhaps let's start with, we'll go back to Tim first, and then come to Philip and Ashley, just to talk to us a little bit about what that feels like.
Yeah, so for people that know me really well, I'm actually quite a chatty person, but it's very hard on a call, because I have to wait for people to stop talking before I can start talking, and then when people talk all over each other, it becomes really difficult. It's much harder when people share their screen. So somebody that is this big on the screen suddenly goes to this big, and then the presentation takes over the screen, and it's hard to read them. And so then I have to look at the captions and the presentation, and I'm trying to take in the presentation as well as reading the captions, and it's very hard. It's tiring, mentally exhausting, and sometimes it doesn't really sink in, and I have to go back and read the notes again. It's usually better for me if people send me the presentation beforehand, so that I can read it, and then it's just in my head, and I can concentrate on what people are talking about. But then that an element of stress there, got to distract me to have the presentation before everybody else in the group. And then also, I say this with love, but online background do make it harder for me to read, because when you move, the background shifts, and then that takes my eye away from your actual face. And facial expression is so important when you're reading people, because I know when somebody's being angry or sarcastic just by the facial expression. I can't hear the tone of voice, the volume going up. So that's really important for me. And while we're on the subject of lip reading, obviously this is an issue for everybody, but the biggest problem is math. How do you lip read through a mask? You can't. So at the moment, I'm having some physiotherapy on my shoulder, and I'm going to the hospital, and the physiotherapist had to wear a mask because of COVID. So it's really difficult to communicate. She can hear me, that's fine, but I have to use my iPhone, turn on the notes function, and then she talks into my phone. But it's good to a degree. My phone left to autocorrect and actually comes up with words that are probably not appropriate for a physiotherapy conversation. And, you know, she's quite a religious woman as well, so it comes up with some explicit words, and I don't know why, because I thought iPhone just don't do those type of words. But anyway, I have to talk. She had to talk a bit slower, a bit clearer, in order for me to understand her. But when you're lying on the floor with one arm up in the air, trying to do something and trying to turn your phone on and listen to her, it's actually really, really difficult. Another challenge for me in COVID is because hospitals are focusing so much on COVID, they have cancelled all my hearing aid appointments. So I actually wear a cochlear implant on my right side, but I haven't worn it for so long because it's broken and I can't get it fixed because they decided that audiology is not an essential service. Who decided that? I don't know. But that's really frustrating for me because when this hearing aid goes, I won't have any hearing aids at all. So that's a real challenge for me in COVID times.
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, it's sort of so, from the sublime to the ridiculous in some cases with the challenges, isn't it? Some of them sound funny, but I imagine that they're not funny to live with. Philip, why don't we come to you just to hear a bit about your experience, which I think in some ways has been rather more positive.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a real disconnect here, right? Because the lived experiences of disabled people under COVID are shocking, right? If you read it in the press, or if you look at, I mean, the Office for National Statistics has done a survey in September, and it makes for absolutely grim reading when it comes to how disabled people have fared through COVID. Because you can imagine, right? I mean, the need for medical appointments, for example, is much higher, and the NHS has cancelled, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of routine appointments. And if your population needs a disproportionate amount of those, then you're going to suffer disproportionately, and that's what's happening. But they also, I think that the community is also suffering from, from a financial perspective, because having a disability is very, very expensive. I mean, I mentioned 4 wheelchairs, and if I actually look at the kit, I mean, it is effectively the actual material cost is fairly minimal, but they charge enormous amounts for equipment. A wheelchair can quite quickly get into the thousands of pounds. And the NHS and services provide a certain amount for a lot of disabled people, but by far not covering the cost for fancier equipment. So from that perspective, the community is really, really suffering, I think. But at the same time, I mean, I think COVID is also an enormous opportunity for the disabled community, because companies have gone through a live test of what it means to have the entire workforce working from home. And as Ashley already alluded to, performance has gone through the roof in many cases. I mean, our performance last year, my personal performance and the desk performance has been really, really good. And I think it's partly because people have become more productive, and people have been forced to become more productive because some of the distractions in an office environment have gone. Yes, we've lost a little bit to the collaborative spirit in an open plan office. But I think that the actual proof is that some of this collaborative spirit is maybe overstated in its importance, and the actual benefits of having people really focus on their tasks without distractions are much greater than we had previously thought. So from that perspective, I think the work environment with a lot of working from home in our industry, I mean, it's obviously not the case for hospitality or retail or anything like that, but in our industry specifically, I think we had a huge boost of productivity in 2020 since COVID set on, and it has proven to institutions that working from home is actually a desirable steady state, and it's not something that is an aberration in the world of work. And in fact, my company has recently published their idea and their desire to move to a, roughly speaking, 50-50 model after COVID, even if all the restrictions are completely lifted. And for me as a disabled person, to bring it back to the question, I mean, to me as a disabled person, this is an enormous win, because I now no longer have to put my prosthetic legs on at 6 a.m. to catch a train, traveling to London, wear them all day, of course, in London, and then take them off when I get home. I don't know, it can be quite late sometimes. So I can now sit in my wheelchair, do the job in exactly the same way I would do it if I had my prosthetics on, until, let's say, the early afternoon. I put them on, I do what I need to do for my body, like my exercise, I go walking and all that stuff. and I can take them on at 6 or 7 p.m. in the evening, having worn them for just a few short hours. And for my body, for my skin, because an amputation or wearing prosthetic legs is a constant balancing act between trying to exercise your body, looking after your skin health, which is really difficult because you have the actual amputation side constantly cut off from the air. The body is not designed like that, so the body starts to rebel. Like you have like I give you maybe an amusing but somewhat silly example, right? There is an absolute good reason why the bottom of your feet don't have any hairs in them, and I have constant battles with hair follicles because they are just not designed to be under constant cutoff from the air. So if I can just leave my prosthetics off for half the day, it solves this problem. And it has solved. It had not had many issues in the whole of 2020, when in previous years it was much more difficult to get on top of this. So those are just a few things, and I think that the companies should really take from this, if they can, that the opportunity for the disabled community to enter the workspace is great now, because we can offer so many flexible models, and we should not let this opportunity pass.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Philip. And we're getting some really great questions in. So what I'd like to do now is turn to some of these questions that are coming in. And Ashley, I'm going to direct the first one to you, which has been asked actually sort of partly in relation to my opening comments about not necessarily labeling disabled people as disabled, and trying to be more inclusive towards people without giving the impression that it's a taboo word or a difficult situation. I think that the experience that all three of you have been through is relevant, but particularly for you, Ashley, who's encountering this sort of for the first time now in sort of relatively short order. What do you think can be done in order for this to become more normal and more sort of more everyday?
Wow, that is a big question. I think, I mean, I guess a big part of it is the awareness side. So things like this and understanding, how many different elements there are when we, say disability, what that can cover, but also when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that this is a really important element of it as well, and it needs to be considered as such. And I know, if you just look at, a lot of different, if I think about, for example, looking at the where we report on numbers as where employers are reporting on numbers, what is being required by them, what is being asked by them, this one isn't a factor. So I think that is, something that we need to develop on further, and that employers need to think more about. And as you can have heard from, the different cases of everyone on this panel, that the experience has been really, really very different. And what they've been able to achieve and deliver in all of our individual roles has been really, really, actually in some cases even enhanced compared to, as Philip described, in his role in particular, given his experience and how that's opened horizons. So I think it's something that we need to just build more awareness around, so that it isn't such a taboo thing. And it is really difficult. It is really difficult in terms of, I guess, someone who's just, as you said, experiencing it for a short, period of time to just understand how to, address these things and how to label them. And because, to be honest, and I think you've probably heard it from the panelists as well, it's just really getting on with life and giving the best we can in terms of everything that we're doing, and trying to make sure that that everyone has the ability to be able to do that when we think about the environment they're working in.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ashley. And then what I might do now is turn to Philip and ask you, there was a great question, which is that the industry has been more vocal about some of the other issues, about a lack of inclusion or a lack of diversity. So gender's been a subject for much longer, and then since the murder of George Floyd last year, the industry has responded and has become much more vocal about race. And I wonder what your perception is of why we've historically been less good at talking about disability, and maybe tie that back into sort of some of the conversations we're having today about what we can do going forward.
Sure. It's interesting, I think, because in terms of the other aspects of diversity, I mean, gender is effectively, I mean, maybe we shouldn't say binary anymore, but it's got 2 or 3 distinct states of, I mean, either you are male or you are female or you are transgender or you are self-identified. Those are effectively the states that you can come under. In race, it's a few more, right? You have a certain racial background. You can self-identify, and it is probably about, I don't know, I mean, I'm just putting a number on this. Let's say it's about 10 different distinct states. In disability, it's different because every single disability is different and is extremely different. And how people feel about their disability, how society feels about disability as a whole, can be very, very disconnected. I think the whole community is grappling with this. If you read about, you know, how people self-identify in gender and race, for example, there is very little that you can have an argument with over this self-identification. In disability, I mean, there are people who are telling me how I should self-identify, and I'm like, hang on a minute, like this is this other argument that I had earlier where I was saying that people say to me, but you're not disabled. But I am, right? And I don't have a problem I don't have a problem to self-identify as a disabled person. The next disabled person might not like it. They might be called, I'm like a differently abled person. I mean, I personally don't like this terminology, but other people like it. And there are certain guidances that actually Scope is very, very good at helping employers with this. And some of the toolkit that will be published as part of this event is fantastic in just highlighting which language to use, which language not to use, and so on. But my personal lived experience, half of these things might not be an issue, or half of these things that are an issue for me are not even in the literature. So I think this is why disability as a you know, as a diversity, as a piece of diversity, is much more difficult for institutions to wrap their policies around and to wrap like sort of their responses around. Whereas, you know, with gender, gender is much easier, right? A company can basically set a target. We want to have 40%, 50%, 60%, whatever the number is, or we want to have an inclusive culture towards gender. That's much easier to formulate, to police, to measure, to the gender pay gap. And obviously it affects by definition almost 50% of the population, whereas disability, I think, affects, I mean, you said it will affect a lot more people then, and I'm sure the statistics that you quoted at the beginning will have shocked some people here, because people acquire disabilities throughout their life. Some of them are temporary, some of them are permanent. Mine is absolutely, definitely permanent, and you know, you learn to live with it. And how you go through this process, I probably identify differently now than I identified 6 months out of hospital. I probably will identify differently again in a few years' time when things change again. So I think that's why it's complicated. I think that's why it's difficult. And I have maybe a somewhat interesting way of looking at this, in a sense that I would encourage employers to kind of think backwards, right? To think from what this individual can bring to the table. What is, you know, what is this person's ability? What can they do for me in my institution? Is this a person worth hiring? And then you solve backwards for all the problems that they have in their life, which might be problems for you, it might not be problems for you. Like, if I hire Tim tomorrow, I would need to put a very, very different set of measures in place compared to if you hire Philip tomorrow, because, you know, Tim doesn't need a phone, but Philip needs level access, right? So we both come from the disabled community as such, but we need very, very different provisions put in place. And how would it, and this is why I don't like this whole policy writing, because if you write a policy from a top level, you can't possibly account for all the individual needs. And I think individual needs is where we need to go. I think, you know, if my company had a policy that said, and I don't know if they do, but let's say they had a policy that says, we cater to abilities as and when they arise. To me, that's the best solution. I know it doesn't work like that, but it would be a very, very, you know, ask the person. You hire someone because they're very, very smart, and they can, you know, they can bring great things to a marketing department, to a compliance department, to an investment desk, whatever it is, and then fix their problems that they have getting in the building, and give them a caption program or whatever they need. If you hire a blind person, they will have very different needs to all of us, right? So it's that sort of, let's solve their problem rather than write some, you know, some 10,000 miles in the air type policy that doesn't really suit anyone really, and gives us an opportunity to opt out of recruiting disabled people because we can point to a policy, right? I mean, I think this is what is happening right now. I think that policies are there. I think companies find it way too easy to actually say it doesn't fit, doesn't suit, doesn't this, doesn't that. So if you just go out and say we hire the best possible people, and if they need something in the process of executing their duties, then we will just put it in place. And I think at that level, the community is best served, because, I mean, as I said, I play wheelchair tennis, and if I look at the people that turn up at these tournaments, then it's amazing what kind of different things they all do, right? And half of them aren't even in a wheelchair, but they still play. You know, the community is extremely diversified, extremely broad, lots and lots of different views on how they want to be labeled, called, not labeled. And why should an asset management company be able to write a policy for all of that? Is I mean, I'm struggling with this actually, and I much prefer the individual approach.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Philip. And you've been touching to a large degree actually in response to another one of the questions that's been asked, which is how we could have an inclusive hiring approach towards people with disabilities. And is there anything specific to the investment industry? And what I might do actually is ask Tim whether you want to expand on any of the things that Philip has just said about what, you know, how we can be better as an industry at hiring disabled people. Although I know, Sally, you'll talk about that as well when we come to you.
Good question. You know, one of the things that really come to mind is the best thing you can do for any industry is to have a conversation with the disabled person. No disrespect to my employer, but when I was trying to get equipment, there was a lack of knowledge in the technology team about the type of equipment I might need, because there are so few deaf people in my company that it was very much being out of one solution fits all. I had to challenge that perception, and they were very keen to listen to me and go, oh right, didn't think of it like that, even though one of the guys that was trying to help me had a son who had a cochlear implant as well. And I had to point out, well, your son's very different to me. And that has been a theme that HSBC has really driven a lot forward in making sure that your individual needs are catered for, rather than say, blind people get this, deaf people get that, wheelchair people get this. And I think that's something that the industry should take on board. You know, talk to the deaf person or the disabled person, what do they need, and what as a company you can do to help them. You might find that quite often, most of the time, the solution is quite simple. The person will tell you what they need and educate you, so don't be afraid to ask. That's my biggest get out of this, if you like, because people are often afraid to ask, and you know, that's just really important.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tim. That was great. So we've got time for one more question before we turn over to Sally. And I think the one that really struck me, that came through partly because it's affected me actually, is how employers can create an environment of trust so that people with disabilities or who are caring for someone and who needs flexibility can speak up and ask for support. And Ashley, I wonder if I might just come back to you on this, for your perspective. This one is something that interests me because I have told my employer that I have a disability, but I haven't actually told my employer what my disability is.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, the famous mute button. No, it is a really good question, and I guess similar to you. I mean, I mentioned before, I think that I haven't specifically said I'm caring for someone with a disability. I need, specific things. But I would encourage I think it's really important, and even the other elements or the other questions around how to make the environment more inclusive and meet the needs and give the supports you need to this to disabled or able, to however we want to define it, to really have that open dialogue and ask the questions so that people do feel comfortable and don't feel that they are going to be discriminated against. I think that's the number one thing, because in the back of my mind, of course, I have this, well, if I make a big deal about it or say that I have special needs because of this, the circumstances of me caring for someone with a disability, will that jeopardize, I don't know, future promotions or how they consider me in terms of my performance, or, all of these factors. And I think these factors come into play, across many elements of diversity and inclusion. But I think it's especially relevant in this area. So yeah, I think that's the most important one, is that there is just much more, awareness and a culture at an employer level where people feel comfortable to be able to say, these are my needs, and I will, perform to the best of my ability and meet all my responsibilities of my role. But I do have these, these additional needs just to support me to be able to do that and do that to the best of my ability. So I think it's really about that open dialogue and people not feeling that they are going to be discriminated against.
Well, I feel like this is
one quick thing to add to this.
Sorry.
I think it's a really interesting shift going on right now in terms of how companies measure performance, because effectively, previously, companies would measure performance partly or to a larger extent in some cases by input, right? So how many hours you turned up, that was a major factor in measuring how you performed, completely irrelevant to the actual output this person produced, right? This employee produces. And we have, I mean, in fact, I've done this with my team. I've very, very clearly stated we're no longer measuring the input at all. I could not care how many hours per day you need to produce the output that I will absolutely measure, right? So, and this shift is very, very much in favor of anyone who has any special requirements, because if you have a special requirement, that means that you have to lie down from 2 to 3 in the afternoon, and I don't have to worry about my employer checking up on me whether I'm actually sitting at my desk from 2 to 3. As long as I get the work done and I produce the output that they require, to the disabled community, this is a win that I think will over time only become really visible. And I think if we can, at the senior leadership level, get people to send this message and reiterate this message that this is where we're transitioning to, and then maybe even specify explicitly how this can be a benefit to, for example, the disabled community, for example, the community with neurodiversity, for example, the community with the community of new mothers, the community of people who care for an elderly relative. All of these communities, they're previously really struggling to provide the one measurement which was so crucial to many, I mean, advertently or inadvertently, that input measure, right? How often do I turn up? How many hours do I work? All this stuff. If that goes away and we only measure output, then for all these communities that struggle with these formulaic ways of measuring. For them, this is a massive. I think this is a massive win, and I feel really comfortable about this shift, because it has resulted in much better outcomes.
Philip, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for that addition. And it's certainly yet another sort of ray of hope in what sometimes feels like a little bit of a grey, sort of very long day of COVID. I think now is a great time for us to pivot, and I'm going to go to Sally Piggott from the fantastic charity Scope, who has partnered with the Disability Workstream, or now the Ability Workstream, to help us think about what the best practices are for both recruiting and retaining people who have disabilities in financial services specifically. And Sally is going to give us an overview, and then hopefully we'll have time for a few questions as well. So please do keep the questions coming. And also, if we don't get to them, then one of the things that we're looking to do is to develop a website or a page within the Diversity Project's website, focusing on disability. And these are some great questions that we'll be looking to answer there as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope we're all well. Now, we don't quite know how this section's going to work, so I'm going to share my screen with you with the presentation, and we're hoping that we've got some polling questions for you to interact with. If the polling questions don't work, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read them out with some options, and then you can kind of put in a chat or something like that to kind of interact a bit, because the interaction's always nice. However, let me start by sharing my screen. Need to make sure the sound is also on. There we go. Okay, so here we are. Scope and the Diversity Project, let's have a chat about disability, which we've already been doing a lot of, and some really good stuff has come out this morning. So for those of you who aren't fully aware of who Scope are, our mission is to drive social change so that disabled people have the same opportunities as everybody else. Now, we do that through our everyday quality strategy. Now, that has three major strands to it. So the first strand is getting the best start in life. So that kind of covers people that have found themselves in Ashley's situation. So there is support there for parents and carers of disabled children to help them navigate through the process of getting a diagnosis, an official diagnosis, through the medical journey that they go through together. It also helps with peer support, and it helps with things like getting your child to sleep properly, because lack of sleep in the household affects everybody. So there's a lot of services there for parents and carers of disabled children. The second strand to our everyday equality strategy is living the life I choose, and that is based around the transition from being a young person to being an adult. And we've got a lot of services there to support disabled people in being able to make decisions to live their lives as independently as possible. We have helplines, and we have lots of other interventions as well. Something's just come up on the chat, just in case that's for me. Let me just have a little look. Oh, no, that wasn't for me. Okay. And the third and final strand is being financially secure. So as we've already talked about, Philip has talked about some of the additional costs of having a disability or a long-term health condition. And Scope's research has shown that on average, a disabled person faces additional costs of around £584 a month compared to a non-disabled person, and that can go up quite significantly with more complex disabilities. So again, that's an important part of what we do. And to help people be financially independent is to help them into work. And the other side of that is where I come in, which is to help employers be able to fully support, progress and retain those individuals. So that's a little bit about Scope. And we do have charity shops, which you might already know. Okay, so on to today's objectives is to understand the disability space in the UK, to understand the social model of disability for those who have not come across that term before, and to hear your experiences and challenges in the recruitment, retention and progression of disabled employees, and to obviously share our toolkits, which were made in conjunction with your work stream. So before I show the first video, has anyone come across, does anybody know what the social model of disability is? I don't think, can people talk back to us on this, or are they just watching? They can't talk back to us. That's going to make the interactive bit a bit harder. Okay, don't worry about that. I'll just play you the video.
I always felt being a disabled person was a problem. After learning about social model, it challenged me to look at disability completely differently. I myself was able to gain some confidence and self-esteem.
Social model basically says we are people with impairments, and those impairments clearly have an impact on how we live our lives. But the impairments are not the things which disable us.
I'm disabled by the world around me, and if the world was more accessible, I would be less disabled, and then I would just be left with my impairment, i.e. what doesn't work. It's not that my legs don't work that's disabling me. It's the fact that if I want to, if I'm on a flat surface, I can wheel around fine, I'm wonderfully happy. It's only when I come up to a flight of stairs.
As a wheelchair user, you have a slightly easier job of explaining the social model. Whereas if you're trying to explain the less physical barriers, it's much harder.
There's barriers everywhere in life to do with how we communicate, to do with people's attitudes.
Discovering the social model actually was a massive liberation on another level. Yeah, I was being treated differently, and no, it wasn't me being deficient, it was everybody else's social anxieties that were being projected onto me.
The blame for you not fitting in is no longer on your shoulders.
Suddenly, my disability is out there and not in here. It was what made me realise that I was something beyond the thing that other people thought I was.
Which is a real liberating thing, but it also means you can change it. We can say to the world, look, you must put a lift in this building. You must make sure that the signage is readable for people with visual impairments.
If you want that equality to be real, you've really got to then tackle the inequality people are experiencing in schools, in workplaces, with transport.
The main reason that the social model, I think, is important to disabled people is that it allows us to be a community. You achieve a whole lot more as a group.
As long as we, as disabled people, make sure that our voices are heard and that all those people that support us also have their voices heard, I think we will get there.
I hope that Scope is doing work that will help disabled people to become prouder of who we are, pushing boundaries around who can be included and where.
Come the glorious day, if it ever came, where all the barriers went, we'd just be people with impairments. We wouldn't be disabled people anymore.
Find out more about Scope's work and how to get involved by clicking below to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
There we go. So I hope you found that video useful in explaining what the social model of disability is, and Scope champions the social model of disability, which includes a language that gets used around disability. So for us, we would use the term non-disabled rather than able-bodied. We would use the term wheelchair user rather than somebody who might be confined to a wheelchair, is something that you hear a lot in the news. And things like that. So the social model is about the language, and it's also about getting out in society and getting society to be more inclusive in everything it does for those with health conditions and disabilities. So I don't seem to be able to launch the polls that I was hoping to launch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question out, and if you could just write some answers in the chat for me, and we'll see how you do, that would be marvellous. So question 1, how many more applications?
Sorry to interrupt, Alex. I'm going to launch the polling now because I can do it from my end.
Beautiful. If you could launch question 1 poll for me, that would be awesome. How many more applications does a disabled job seeker need to make to secure work than a non-disabled job seeker? Is it 40%, 50%, 60% or 70%? Please vote now. Oh, 50% from there. Lovely. Thank you. And whenever you think everyone's voted, Tim, or we've got enough votes, if you want to share that response, that'll be great. Can you all see this? Well, I can. I can't see. Normally when I do it, I can see how many people have voted so far, but I can't see that. So yeah.
I think it might be set up so that you have to answer all the questions at once.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, let's do that then, shall we? And then I'll just have to go through the answers one by one. So question 2 is, what ratio of disabled workers go as far as hiding their disability from their employer? Is that 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in 6, or 1 in 7? Question 3, what percentage of disabilities are acquired during working age? You had a little bit of a clue earlier from Alex on that one. Is it 50%, 60%, or 70%? And what percentage of disabled people hold higher managerial or professional roles? Is that 15%, 8%, 10%, or 12%? And the final question for you, number 5, 28.1% of non-disabled working age people hold a degree level qualification compared to what percent of disabled people? Is it 14.9, 10.4, 8.2, or 12.6? So if you would all like to vote on those, and then Tim, if you could share the results once everybody's voted, and I'll make a note of which one was more popular on each question. That would be marvellous.
Okay, so 53% of people have voted at the moment. They're just waiting for more people to vote. Give it a second.
I'm not sure how everyone's dialing in, so if anyone's just on audio, then maybe they won't be able to do the polling side.
Okay, I think most people have finished now. So the answer to question 1 was actually a tie break between the top 2, which was 60 and 70%, with 38% of the vote each.
Excellent. Question 2.
Question 2, the top answer was 1 in 4.
The top answer was which one, sorry? 1 in 4?
1 in 4, yes.
Lovely. Question 3.
And then number 3, again, we have another tie break with 50% and 60%, with 33% of people voting for each.
Excellent. And number 4?
And then number 4, the top answer was 8%, with 69% of people voting for those.
Okay, and question 5.
Question 5, the top answer was 14.9%. 49% of people voted for that.
Beautiful. Tim, thank you ever so much. That's marvellous. That is absolutely marvellous. We can go back to the presentation now and we'll go through each of those and see how you all got on. So the answer to question 1, let's have a look if we got that right. So a lot of you said it was tie break between 60 and 70%. Congratulations to those who said 60%. You are in fact correct. Now, however, it's fairly unacceptable percentage, I think you would agree. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about disabled people who can work, want to work, and are actively trying to work, but it takes them 60% more effort than a non-disabled person to be able to achieve that, which kind of indicates the fact that that very initial process of advertising your job vacancies, the platforms that they're on, the language that is used in them is not as accessible as what they could be. There are various different strategies that you can use to help with that. There are specialist agencies that only work with disabled people. They can help you to fill some of your roles. If you go to them, you can work with your current preferred supplier recruiters and encourage them to put forward candidates who have a health condition or disability. You can do a guaranteed interview scheme. There's more information on all of these things in the toolkits that are being launched as part of today. There's lots of stuff I can tell you, but I can't go into all of it because I need to be able to hand back to Alex before we hit the end of time. So yeah, I can't go into all of it, but do make use of those toolkits. Question number 2. So what ratio of disabled workers go as far as hiding their disability from their employer? Your top answer was 1 in 4. For those of you who went for 1 in 5, you are correct. And for those of you 1 in 4, you were close. Now, it's a stark indication, really, of the misunderstandings and unconscious bias that exist around disabilities, even today. So people feel the need to hide it, or their other needs for adjustments, such as caring responsibilities, because they do feel it's going to affect their promotional opportunities in the future. They do feel that they may be at more risk of losing their job in the future if there's a bit of a restructure or something like that. 50% of disabled people actually fear losing their job if they are open and honest about their health condition or disability. Part of the reason that we've got this statistic as well is, as Alex was talking about earlier, the word disability. So not everybody who has a long-term health condition that would require and benefit from adjustments actually identifies with the label of being disabled. So a lot of the time you can increase the amount of your employees that share information with you simply by changing the wording of the question that you're asking. So you're not just asking if they have a disability, you're asking if they have a long-term health condition, kind of like on your HR systems and things like that. I worked with a role model who also, well, until I went through it all with her, didn't realise that she qualified, if you like, or fitted the description of having a disability. She had no idea. She just thought she had a health condition. And I'm like, yeah, but if you look at the descriptions, it affects you on a day-to-day basis. Yes, you do come under that. And she was quite surprised as well. Okay, so some of the ways you can tackle this, and I did see some of the questions in the Q&A section. So your senior leaders, obviously, if you have sponsors on your working groups from your senior leaders, that is very helpful. If they've got stories that they can share of their own experience, lived experience is the strongest, and it will help to encourage others to share their experiences. Part of your move towards disability confident, if you want to get as far as level 3, is the requirement to publish your disability data. Now, the government give you some voluntary reporting data that you can do. Scope, and it's in your toolkits as well, give you further ways that you can record data to measure your impact and build your action plan about where things need to improve. So those things are really important as well. Okay, so what percentage of disabilities are acquired during working age? The statistic does change depending on where you look for it, to be fair. You guys said 50 to 60%. Alex in the beginning said 70. Where I got it from, it's actually 80. So it's very different wherever you go. But fundamentally, it is a fact that an awful lot of disabilities are acquired during our working age. So if you are not an inclusive employer, if you are not ready to be able to support those individuals, then you run the risk of losing them. And if you lose them, you're losing their knowledge, their skills, their networks, you're losing all of the training that you've put into that individual, and then you're going to have to face the costs of rehiring. So the recruitment costs, the retraining costs, and waiting for that individual to get fully up to speed. So it's beneficial to all organisations to be more inclusive. Now, because your industry is one that is particularly specialist, I put this question in, which is what percentage of disabled people hold higher managerial or professional roles? Now, this was interesting because this one you got spot on. It is, in fact, 8%. So that's not a lot, really, is it? To be fair, not a lot at all. So we need more representation in the senior roles. We need to look at that progression journey and what the barriers are in those. Normally I would ask you to kind of interject with what you think, but we can't do that. Okay, the last question. 28.1% of non-disabled working age people hold a degree qualification compared to what percentage of disabled people? And you guys went for 14.9%. I'm starting to think you were doing some research before today, because again, you were spot on. It is in fact 14.9%. And as pleased as I am that you got that right, let's have a look at how many non-disabled people of working age hold a degree level. It's almost double. That's bad. That's really bad. So when you're looking at industries that require people to have higher level qualifications, what we need to remember is further education is more accessible now than it ever has been, but it's still not fully accessible. And that can create a barrier for people. So maybe it's time to look at that progression journey for internally to see if there are other ways that you can bring people through that maybe aren't in those positions at the moment, but want to work towards them. Is there qualifications that they can do while they're in work with you that can progress them to that stage? So think about different ways of doing that. Okay, how am I doing for time? Right, I've only got a couple of minutes, so I won't hold off for too long. So the current toolkits that we have available for you are the recruitment, guaranteed interview scheme, policies and procedures, reasonable adjustments, and an access to work fact sheet. Now, with policies and procedures, Philip is very right in the sense that you can't write a policy or procedure that's going to cover every single situation or every single individual. But it is good to look at your policies and procedures and see if there are some other ones that need to be introduced that don't currently exist that would help and support people with long-term health conditions and disabilities, particularly the recruitment side of things, to make sure that that is accessible as it needs to be. Reasonable adjustments, it's a good idea if you can have 2 ways minimum of requesting reasonable adjustments within your organisation. If it can be one route is your direct line manager and another route is an independent body of some sort, be that a specialist in HR, be that someone from your ability network or something like that, because not everybody is comfortable being able to talk to their direct line manager for a number of reasons. Another really good thing is to have a central budget for reasonable adjustments within your organisation so that the line manager doesn't start to worry about any costs of adjustments affecting their bottom line. Although do make as much use of access to work, as Tim has said earlier, as you can, because you will be amazed at all the different kind of costs that that can help towards. So I'm going to try and show you a quick example of the toolkit. Can everyone see that one, or are you still on the presentation screen?
I think we're still on the presentation screen right now.
Okay, let me just share the new screen. There we go. Okay, so this is an example of the toolkit. What you get is you get lots of rationale, recommendations, some of the barriers, some of the understandings, and then some of the learnings and some of the best practice that you can take from it. Okay, so it's a very quick glance, I grant you, but it should hopefully be helpful. And we're always here for people if they require any further support putting those things in place. So Scope's Get Inclusive service, which is what I do, can provide interactive sessions and resources to help your organisation's inclusive journey. Our website contains lots of information on campaigns and resources. And we have our Work With Me campaign that we did in partnership with Virgin Media. There's a microsite there where you can take a pledge and share best practice with other organisations, which is a very helpful resource as well. And finally, if you want more information on how we can support you to become more inclusive employers, do get in contact at getinclusive@scope.org.uk. And that's it for my bit, unless anyone has any questions for me.
Well, Sally, before we move to closing comments, actually, I would love it if you could answer one of the questions that came up was, do you think that companies and HR departments worry too much about the legal issues that could happen if they discriminate against disabled people, and whether that might make them reluctant to employ them?
Yes.
That's a very simple answer.
Yeah, in a nutshell, absolutely, yes. It is a concern. It is a worry. I hear it a lot. And I think what organisations need to do is they need to understand that one approach does not suit all. So as everybody has said today, work with the individual, talk to the individual, and don't make assumptions, you know. So a lot of disabilities out there are invisible. And you tend to find that, you know, people will only ask someone if they need any adjustments, if they can visibly see a health condition or disability, whereas actually we need to get into the habit of asking everybody, because a lot of the time the person would benefit from maybe compressed hours, reduced hours, flexible working, agile working, lots of different things for lots of different reasons that you can't see automatically. So we just need to get into the habit of asking everybody. And HR companies need to be, HR departments, sorry, you just need to be confident of the reasons why you're declining the candidate. If the only reason that you're declining the candidate is because they have a health condition or disability, you're not quite sure how to handle it, that's the wrong reason.
In fact, I think it's probably illegal.
Little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
little bit.
A little bit. And actually, I suppose the other thing that's worth mentioning is that, you know, if all of our employers actually think that they don't have anybody with disabilities, even if they're not disclosed, they're almost certainly wrong. And so actually, if they think that this is a new risk that they're taking on, it's actually a risk that they have to manage on an ongoing basis anyway.
Absolutely correct. And on some of the occasions when I do the initial session that I tend to deliver to organisations, the End the Awkward session, it never ceases to amaze me how many people share for the very first time in front of their colleagues about a health condition or disability that they have. And it's because that confidence has started to come out. So you're absolutely right. I guarantee you there are more people in your organisations that would benefit from adjustments and support than you currently realise. Guarantee it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Sally, that's such a great place for us to end your part of the session. And I can't thank you enough, both for this and also for all of the work that you've done with the Workstream. That's been rather more extended than we were expecting. We will, for the people who are joining us, we will be making the toolkits very available by email at the minute, but as I mentioned, we are also building a page within the Diversity Project's website, so it will be coming there as well. But Sally, we've so enjoyed working with Scope. You guys have been absolutely brilliant. I'd also like to thank the fabulous panelists, Ashley, Philip, and Tim, for sharing their, you know, sometimes really quite extraordinary experiences and being tremendously open. And what I'd love to do is just finish by encouraging all of you who are listening to think about what you can do. And as we go into the rest of 2021, the two areas of focus that we will have as part of the disability workstream will be on awareness and on inclusion. So driving more awareness of what it's like to have a disability, of what it's like to have a colleague who's disabled or a child, and just to open those lines of communication, just make it more normal. And then the second thing we want to do is we want to really drive inclusion. And so this is where we're going to be launching a campaign to try and encourage as many member firms as we can to become disability confident. And you'll be seeing a lot more material about that. And so with that, I'd love to also thank all of you who have given us so much of your time today to come and talk to us with us about the challenges of trying to make our industry much more welcoming and benefit more from all of the talents of people with disabilities. And with that, have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye.